It's hilarious, dude. It's hilarious.
Suppose you could
I
make
love
an
this debate.
argument that if
Yeah,
people
he's
really do
losing.
have freedom, then a grown, like grown adults who are related should not be banned by law and should not have a cop bash him over the head with a baton for like having sex with a cousin or something. Okay, but you're taking this to like this weird extreme example where
that happens now.
Oh, sure. Okay. Anyway, so you're taking this to a weird extreme example where, okay, let's take it to the other extreme and say, do you believe that the government should rush into your house anytime you're doing anything where they determine that that's degenerate or not moral or productive? You're smoking a cigarette right now. Is that enough of a reason for someone to come get you? Like, would there be any realm where you would say, maybe the government shouldn't be regulating every inch of what I determine from divine, whatever that is moral or immoral?
Yeah. So actually, this
is smoking a cigarette go against Christianity, right?
I don't think it does. I could be wrong about that, but Andrew is very well versed in Christian ethics. So if it was against Christian ethics, I doubt he would be smoking a cigarette. So I'm just assuming it is fine.
Maybe it's okay. Maybe
I've heard that there's if you get drunk, this is a sin. But like, for example, like drinking alcohol is not a sin, but getting drunk is a sin. It's probably the same thing with every single drug, where if you take a little bit of it, it's like, okay, but if you take enough where it interferes with your perception and your ability to judge and enact your will, then that's probably considered a sin.
Also, I noticed that earlier before that Dave was doing a lot of dumb jabs at him. Oh, you debate
21-year-old
OnlyFans sluts. And like, I feel like when he said that automatically makes him kind of look really, really bad, because it just makes him sound like he doesn't really have an argument. It's just like just nothing but insults.
It's an ad hominem.
Yeah. I really, every time I debate somebody, I always try my best to stay away from like insulting people, because especially in formal debates, because I feel like when you insult somebody or you lose your cool, you kind of lost.
On you.
Yeah, it reflects on you. Yeah. Absolutely.
The reason that I just go ahead and concede a lot of these points, because there's no real reason to fight them. For instance, if you agree with me that the only justification that you can have is that, well, because God told you it's gross, and so therefore you ought to not do it, then this would mean that you agree with me in divine command and should be a Christian ethicist. That's why that's done. That's why I just make it super easy for you to go ahead and agree. And you did. You agreed. Absent. So I'm just going to ask this straight out. Okay. And no, I don't believe in that sort of government overreach. And I can give you my systems and reasons for why that is too, under Christian ethics, or Christian ethics, where we both take into account consequence, but also take into account duty. So I'm going to ask this: absent any kind of divine command, God didn't tell you anything, would you say that it's not moral? And can you justify why it's not moral for a brother to hump his sister? Could you do that absent divine command? Like, honest question, Dave. This is super important.
Sure. So I would say this, right? I grew up an atheist. Well, I mean, I'm Jewish, but I grew up like not a religious person. It was just, kind of what I was born into. And I was pretty much an atheist for most of my life. And then I had some experiences as I became a young adult that made me think about God and kind of get in touch with him. And then it was really when I had my first child that I really found God.
You got in touch with God?
So I would agree with you that, yes, there is something from God that instructs me as to what is right and wrong in this world.
Sure.
However, but before I ever believed in God, yeah, there was just a deep feeling inside of me that would have been very wrong. And I do believe that was always from God. So
okay.
I don't know.
Then absent God.
What that proves.
So then absent God.
Nothing in this argument.
Yeah. No, it does though. And I'm going to explain how. Go ahead. Because you're saying that absent God is just your preferences. It's just how you feel.
No,
that's what makes what's moral or not moral. Then what would make it immoral absent God?
That is what Dave said. I know he's defending himself now. He literally said that these things, these moral urges that he got later in life, he realized that it's from God. So the negation of this would mean that absent God, there is no moral justification. That is what Dave said.
Yeah, that
God.
is. He's got him there. He's got him there, man.
Here's the thing, dude. Andrew, I think you're doing a thing here that a lot of like internet blood sport debaters try to do, which is that you're trying to win before you're actually listening to what I'm saying.
I can steel man the entire thing if you'd like.
Try to listen to what I actually said.
Andrew is listening to what he's saying.
What I said was not before I believed in God, it was just subjective. What I said was before I believed in God, I always had this feeling, and what I believe is that was always God.
So to steel man,
that's a very different thing than what you said. All right?
Sure. So I'll just steel man the position. The position, to make sure I don't get this wrong at all, is that you believe that there was some type of natural law given to you by God before you ever even believed in God, correct?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Great. So I steel man the position. So to my question, which you didn't actually answer,
sure,
which is this: absent God, if there was no God, could you justify why this would be immoral or not?
Yeah, I don't know that you could. I think absent God, it's very difficult to arrive at morality.
Right. Yeah. So absent God, so you're a divine command as well, divine command theorist, just like myself. So if that's true and you're a divine command theorist.
What about anti-realists? Don't leave the anti-realists out of this.
Yeah, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And we have now shown how self-ownership leads to absurd conclusions like a brother being able to hump their sister.
No, but I disagree with it. Okay.
Well, okay. Why can't, if you own yourself, why can't you hump your sister if she owns herself, Dave? That makes no sense.
What do you mean by why can't you? Why can't if you don't own yourself, why can't you hump your sister? What does that mean?
Good question. But my point is with the non-aggression principle, the entire
without their consent.
Yeah.
That's the real question is ownership, is whether you have the right to use that thing without another person's consent.
You're not asking anything, dude.
Yeah, I am.
So let's just say this. And man, I wish you had picked an example that wasn't so fucking uncomfortable to talk about. But here, you, Andrew, don't own yourself. Why can't you just hump your sister?
You could.
Exactly. So what the hell are you asking? What's the question?
But that goes to my point. I think that if you actually have self-ownership as something more than an axiom, meaning it's justified somehow that you actually do own yourself, it's not just a social construction, then you wouldn't be able to hump your sister if you did not own yourself, right?
What do you mean wouldn't be able to?
But if you do own yourself, you can still hump your sister. The point being,
Andrew, do you own yourself?
Under the current paradigm of the social construction, we would say yes.
Okay. But so if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to hump your sister. I don't get.
No, you still could, but
I just want to say, Andrew, when Andrew says wouldn't, he means you shouldn't. You should not. Yeah. You ought not hump your sister. Yeah. So there is a little bit of miscommunication going on.
Yeah, there's obviously there's a would and a should and a could, and these guys need to separate that. Obviously people could hump their sister. Should they hump their sister?
But it does not mean they should hump their sister.
Does not mean that they should hump their sister.
Yeah.
Whether or not they should hump their sister depends on your, moral framework. And, obviously under our moral framework, if your sister doesn't want you to hump her, well, then you can't hump her.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
That is the point.
So that's it. So you still could. So what are you saying?
So let me try again. Just listen to what I'm saying, like I just did yours. In fact, maybe you can steel man this for me.
Okay.
Maybe like I just did for you.
Let me listen and I'll see if I can.
So my point is that self-ownership is why you should not be allowed to aggress against another person, because they own themselves. Correct?
Okay.
Is that correct? Isn't that the basis of the NAP? You own you, I own me. That's why we cannot aggress against each other, correct?
Sure.
Okay, got it. And yet here we're both talking about using state authority to aggress against people who own themselves, who aren't actually doing anything you can justify as being wrong outside of Christian ethics. And so the thing is that seems to dispel the NAP. Now, can you steel man that back to me?
Okay.
So I know.
So you're saying that if we own ourselves, and everybody and an act of aggression would be violating someone else's self-ownership, then it wouldn't be an act of aggression to what? Kill yourself, incest amongst adults, things like this.
Right.
Okay. So
if that's true, and the only moral oughts that we have for why you shouldn't do this is through Christianity.
No, I didn't say no. By the way, I didn't say Christianity, but you said that. But
okay, fine. God, whatever the justified axiom is for God, for divine command. Okay,
sure.
If that's the only way that we can justify that this is immoral, then the idea that you owning yourself and two consenting adults owning themselves in anarcho-capitalist land can't be true, because you are willing to use and violate.
How do you know that?
No, I was just saying. I was just saying. Oh, I guess he is an ANCAP because he's a. Well, I guess he must call himself an ANCAP because he wouldn't have addressed that towards him if it wasn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Also, Andrew does know a little bit about anarcho-capitalism because I've seen him have a lot of talks with Fabian Liberty, so I'm not entirely sure. I'm pretty sure he has a good understanding of anarcho-capitalism, but yeah.
No, I was talking about Dave Smith. Andrew Wilson, definitely, he seems to have more of an understanding about anarcho-capitalism than it seems Dave Smith over here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of disappointing.
Their self-ownership with aggression because you think they're doing something morally wrong, but you can't justify what they're doing that's morally wrong.
No, okay, so again, this is back what I was trying to say before, that I think there's these two things that need to be separated. So there's the moral application of the initiation of violence, and then there's morality. And they're not exactly the same thing. And so if my neighbor, let's just say, my neighbor is not being a good husband and being a good father. Okay, so like let's say he's just very cold with his children and like doesn't pay the bills on time and doesn't work and is lazy and does all types of things that I judge to be morally wrong. Like I think he should be a better father and a better husband. But if I go over there and beat him over the head with a club to make him be a better husband and father, it's not as simple an equation as was he morally right or wrong? The question is it morally justified for me to enact this force against him in order to make, like, is that more moral or immoral than his initial sin? So that's the question that you get into when you start talking about government regulating a lot of these things. It's not as simple as you're making it out that, well, if people own themselves, then it has to be morally justified, whatever they do.
Okay, so let's see if we can't parse this out. And again, I'll see if I can't just steelman this with my criticism. So the thing is that I agree. We can look at scales, right? We can say that we can get to absurd conclusions if we were to say that there's no time or place to apply some sort of like aggression towards somebody, right? Otherwise, you would aggress on them for anything that you consider some kind of moral failure. And obviously, that's not what either of us are after. Sure. What I'm saying is that if we take it to its logical conclusion, libertarianism, which is what I said in my opening, as a consequence of itself, has to actually lead to degeneracy. And the reason is because of the idea here is that I own me and you own you. And if we consent to the two things we do together and it hurts nobody else, therefore not violating the non-aggression principle.
I disagree with Andrew here because he's walking into the practical side of things, which is where he immediately loses, because libertarianism always wins in the practical side of things. He's saying that if we have a free society where we don't have law to crack down on like prostitution and incest and stuff like this, then people are going to dabble more into these things. But he's completely ignoring the social and the community part of society that will judge these people and judge them into behaving better. He's completely ignoring that part.
I would agree. Andrew, at the end of the day, he has this weird way of looking at things. He has a religious way of looking at things. So, he's basically like, whatever God says is true. Whatever God says is not true. I mean, or is right or is not right, you know? But the one thing about Andrew that he is right is they're both on a spectrum, right? Which is essentially there's a spectrum of you can either be full on socialist, which is full government control over the economy, and then there's like ANCAP, where there's like no control over the economy, no state control. These people, these two guys, they're somewhere like in between that spectrum, basically.
Yes.
And he's kind of calling him out for him not being consistent, but he's using the same, like he's also on the spectrum, which would kind of make him inconsistent too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're almost done here. We're just gonna do a few more minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. But yeah.
Which is the foundation for which this thing, revolves. Then how can you make ever a claim against homosexuals getting married, or against incest, or against any of these things? How can you possibly make that claim? That's the ultimate question.
Okay, so a couple things here. I don't think that's the ultimate question, and I do think that I could make the claim against that in the same way that you could. And I think we already established this, right? That we can both make the claim for the exact same reasons, because we believe in God and we believe in morality and we believe that this is immoral. So we both have the exact same ability to make the claim. But if we're talking about what your more, I think, broader point that you made there, that libertarianism leads to immorality, I think is completely wrong. And I think this is like kind of the most
We're entering Dave's domain now, because he's good with
fundamental miscalculation that a lot of people on the right who reject libertarianism make. The idea that, well, freedom and liberty is really what leads to degeneracy. And that's just not true. And in fact, empirically and logically, we can look at the situation, particularly the situation of the United States of America, and go, look, as the government has grown bigger and bigger, you've seen degeneracy get more and more out of control. And I understand why there is a movement against degeneracy. I understand we live in a moment right now where I think our society is essentially disintegrating. And I think that that's one of the things that, Andrew, you kind of are, I don't know, prominent for pointing out. The disintegration of values and norms all throughout.
But the reason I believe that those values and norms are being eroded is because of libertarians and social leftist elites who often will move towards this principle of non-aggression. They just do it in two different ways. The way one, which libertarian does it, is by saying, if I'm not violating you and your non-aggression principle in some way, then you really have no claim to tell me to do anything, and everything is affirmed through private property. The leftist just affirms it the opposite direction, says there's no such thing as private property, but they apply the same principle of, if I'm not hurting anybody, then what's the problem? And so as we dive into what is the non-aggression principle, the non-aggression principle is the principle that if you are not aggressing against somebody else and you own yourself, they cannot aggress against you. So via consent, you cannot utilize the state, Dave, to have them go and break up an incest family who is all consenting with each other and having orgies nightly. You can't do it.
I understand that's your perspective on this, but that has nothing to do with what I'm getting into. So actually what the non-aggression principle implies is that at best, government ought to be severely restricted, and at worst, the government ought to not exist at all. Now, as we've had the rise in government, and I mean, look, in the United States of America, just in the last 20 years, in the last 20 plus years, which we could go back a lot further than that, you've had a tremendous growth in the size of government. And what happens as the government gets bigger and bigger is that all of the things that Christians and traditionalists tend to value get undermined. And so this institution of the government that is inherently based on violating the non-aggression principle does its absolute best to replace, take over, and monopolize all of the areas where traditionally family and community had domain. And
yeah,
so
but
I
why
think-
would that be problematic if the non-aggression principle logically should be ignored for these moral oughts? That's
hold on,
that is
but
the
that's
question.
Well, hold on. That's a separate question. The point I'm making is that it's not an outgrowth of the non-aggression principle. It's an outgrowth of a rejection of the non-aggression principle. That's actually what leads to all of this.
So then
stuff.
if we were to have the non-aggression principle with a shrunken government, are we still going to use the government in order to aggress against consenting adults who want to have incest? Or not?
As long as a government exists, it will be used to aggress against non-consenting adults. And
Great.
So, yes,
then
I don't know.
Yes.
Listen, Andrew, you're trying to obsess over this incest argument. Okay.
Yeah, he's got him.
Laws
It's foundational.
Laws against incest. I'll grant you that. Sure.
No,
Fine.
don't do it, Dave.
Can we move on to any other topic now?
Yeah, but
Can we move on to talking about the state of the country as it actually exists?
Yeah, but this is the
pretty
state of the
funny.
country as it actually exists.
Well, hold on. It's pretty funny because we live under the most powerful centralized government in the history of the world. The biggest organization in the history of the world is the United States of America's federal government in Washington, D.C., spending over $6 trillion a year, employing millions of people with the capability of overthrowing regimes all around the world. And instead, the argument we're getting here is, but if there was no government, who would stop an adult brother and sister from fucking? That's kind of goofy, man. It doesn't really have anything to do with
I just want to let
what
you know
we're
that
living
saying
through.
it's kind of goofy isn't an argument. You just said if we scale the government down to its umpteenth point of scale down, as long as there was still a government, you would want them to enforce action via violating the non-aggression principle for your preference. So if there was,
No, that's not what I said.
well, it's Dave, it is. It's an entailment. If the government's really, really, really big and enforce it right now, and then you say, but if it was really, really small, we would still enforce that because you want to have those laws, then regardless of the size of government, the degeneracy is still going to exist, right? And it's still going to need to be enforced against regardless of the size of the government.
I'm sorry, just can you rephrase the question? What is it exactly you're asking me?
I'm asking you, if we reach anarcho-utopia, we scale the government
I'm
down.
not for a utopia, but
okay,
so
but
whatever.
if we reach anarcho, whatever you want, as the ultimate, right? The government is now scaled down to the point where it's essentially gone, right? Would you still want enforcement against this kind of thing? And how could you have enforcement against it without a government?
What against what kind of thing?
Like incest or gay marriage or any of these degenerate actions?
Okay, well, I think there's a pretty big gap between incest and gay marriage, but I will say that I think there's a gap between
what
that.
is it?
But
yeah, Andrew's got him here because Dave can't point out the gap between the two things, so it's just kind of rough.
Yeah.
But
He's got him here. He's got him here. If he's gonna say that he, well, obviously we believe in private enforcement of law, of course. That would be the first thing that I would say. But private enforcement of law would not have the right to stop another two consenting adults from doing what they want with each other. You know what I mean? That's kind of ridiculous. So Dave Smith, it seems that he wants to hold on to being against things that he finds disgusting, but while also saying that the things that he doesn't find disgusting should be legal, you know?
Exactly, which just boils down to my preferences.
My preferences, yeah. And it's just, I just don't really see that really working out, mainly because, you know, it's, you know, the second that you have another person that has my preferences as well, it's just like, okay, well, how do you settle that dispute? So you have to have a consistent way. Can't be based on whims and arbitrariness.
Exactly, and you can't.
Nope.
So, I mean, we made it. There's some more, but I don't want to keep you too long.
I don't think we need. I don't think there's any more that we need to go through. I think we got the idea of the debate.
Yeah. There's about 40 more minutes, but I think we got the primary stuff out of the way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can always revisit it. We probably won't, but we could always revisit it if we wanted to. At the end, they basically just talk a little bit more about it. Some of the calls are pretty fun, so maybe we could do that on a separate day. Because some people like go in there, some people that we know. That's always fun, so we could probably do some calls at a later date. But this is the primary part of the argument. Essentially, Andrew's just making the case the NAP comes down, it boils down to your preferences, and Dave Smith fails to understand what he's talking about because he doesn't have moral justification, because you would have to prove moral realism, which he's not doing. But on the practical side of things, Dave Smith is absolutely right. And when he started going into the practical side, Dave just kind of like picked it up and he started running. Like when they got into like practicality.
He didn't let him,
Yeah, Dave got into that and he's like, and Dave made some really great cases. We have the most degeneracy in the world right now. And guess what we also have the most of in the world right now? Big government. So it's like, if we're going by that correlation, Dave's totally got Andrew beat, because it's crazy. We do have a massive government nowadays. And we're also at like the worst societal level we've ever been in history.
Also, how do you measure degeneracy? You know what I mean? That's kind of a weird
exactly.
thing, right?
That's funny, because Andrew kind of like takes for granted that these things are degenerate without proving that they're degenerate. Right there, he's using moral
such a
realism.
Personal preference thing, right? You know, that's based on personal preference.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is based on personal preference, and Andrew doesn't have a justified reason for why these things are degenerate, like trans issues, homosexual marriage. He doesn't have justification other than divine revelation, though, which is a logical fallacy.
Yeah.